picture the Palk Bay. For centuries, really, it's been this vibrant, life-giving place, a shallow sea between Tamil Nadu and India and northern Sri Lanka.
Steeped in history,
Yeah.
generations fishing there.
Exactly, livelihoods tied to the tides. But, right now, beneath that surface, there's this real tension. It's been building for decades, but it feels particularly sharp right now, here on July 2nd, 2025.
It's not just about fish anymore, is it?
Not at all. It's sovereignty, it's survival, and it's this huge human drama unfolding, plus a looming environmental issue we need to talk about.
Absolutely.
So today, we're diving deep into this Palk Bay conflict. We want to unpack it, understand where it came from, and maybe see what the future holds for the people caught in the middle.
And we really have to start with the immediate situation. Sri Lanka's stance is, well, crystal clear right now.
What are they saying?
They've issued a stark warning. Continued arrests, continued boat seizures, zero leniency if Indian fishermen cross into their waters in the Palk Bay.
And at the center of that is this fishing method, right? Bottom trawling.
That's the flashpoint. It's incredibly destructive, and it's directly hitting the livelihoods of Sri Lankan fishermen.
Yeah, you can see it happening. Since mid-June, at least 19 Indian fishermen arrested?
That's right, since June 14th, and another 7 just on June 30th. Their boats were seized, too.
It's not abstract, is it? It's hitting poor fishing communities hard, both in Tamil Nadu and, crucially, in northern Sri Lanka areas still recovering from war. People keep calling for dialogue, but the tension just feels raw.
It really does. And it's striking because, historically, this wasn't a contested space.
Or it was shared.
For generations, yeah. A common fishing ground, communities from both sides, fishing alongside each other. There was this kind of unspoken understanding, shared heritage. Lines on a map didn't really matter in the same way.
But eventually those lines did get drawn. The International Maritime Boundary Line, the IMBL, that came about through agreements in 1974 and 1976.
And that changed everything.
Suddenly, this shared space, almost overnight, becomes a zone where fishing is seen as poaching by Sri Lanka.
Exactly. And that's when you start seeing the regular arrests of fishermen from Tamil Nadu. Shared waters became contested waters.
And did the end of the Sri Lankan Civil War affect this? That was 2009.
Oh, significantly. Hugely. Imagine northern Sri Lankan fishermen, many displaced for, 26 years during the conflict?
A whole generation.
Right. They finally returned to their ancestral waters, hoping to rebuild. And what do they find?
Empty seas.
Far from it. They find their traditional grounds teeming with large Indian trawlers. It wasn't just competition. For them, it felt like, an invasion, threatening their ability to recover after decades of hardship.
So attempts were made to sort this out, weren't they? Dialogues in 2004, 2010, trying to limit trawling near the boundary.
Yes, there were talks, aimed specifically at curbing bottom trawling and restricting fishing close to the IMBL.
But they didn't stick, clearly. Why do you think those early efforts failed to create a lasting solution?
Well, fundamentally, it boils down to a lack of sustained political will and, critically, enforcement. The talks produced pledges, sure, promises. But the underlying economic drivers pushing Indian fishermen to use bottom trawlers weren't really tackled. And the agreements themselves, they lacked teeth. No strong monitoring, no real consequences for violations built in.
So it just drifted back to the status quo.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Fishermen on the ground facing economic pressure, stuck with what worked for them financially in the short term, even if it fueled the conflict and damaged the environment long term. It's a tough cycle to break.
Which brings us back to bottom trawling itself. Why is this method so central to the conflict? What makes it so bad?
It's the sheer scale and lack of discrimination.
Yeah.
You're essentially dragging enormous heavy nets across the seabed. Sometimes they have these weighted doors to really dig in.
Like plowing the ocean floor.
Exactly. Marine biologists compare it to clear-cutting a forest. It catches fish, yes, but it also just obliterates everything else. Coral reefs, vital nurseries for fish, gone. Seagrass beds, destroyed. Countless young fish that haven't had a chance to grow, scooped up.
So Sri Lanka banned it for that reason?
Yeah.
The environmental devastation?
Precisely. Because it undermines the entire ecosystem, the very foundation the fish stocks depend on.
It's not just what it catches, it's what it destroys in the process. And that directly hits the Sri Lankan fishermen who use more traditional methods, right? Like line fishing or smaller nets.
Absolutely. Their methods are generally more sustainable, targeting specific species, often on a smaller scale. Bottom trawling just wipes the slate clean. It makes it impossible for fish stocks to recover properly.
And this Palk Bay used to be incredibly rich, didn't it? Hundreds of fish species, shrimp.
Incredibly biodiverse. around 580 fish species recorded. But now, it's facing potential collapse because of this pressure.
It really sets up this awful your pain versus my pain dynamic.
It does, and the human cost is immense on both sides. Think about someone like K. Rajachandran. He's from Karanagar in northern Sri Lanka. It's an area still heavily impacted by the war.
What's his experience?
He talks about just watching their fishing grounds get plundered. Their income has crashed.
Yeah.
Partly weather, yes, but mainly because the trawlers leave so little behind they came back hoping to rebuild, and now this, it's an existential threat for them.
And then you hear from the Indian side, fishermen like Ramesh from Ramswaram, and you get the other side of the desperation. He talks about depleted stocks in their own waters. Crossing that boundary line, the IMBL, feels like the only option sometimes. Not something they want to do, but driven by pure economic need.
It's a terrible bind. One side trying to protect what's left, the other feeling forced to cross lines just to feed their families.
And the recent flare-up really underscores this cycle. Tamil Nadu has its annual fishing ban, right? April 15th to June 14th this year.
Yeah, meant to let the Palk Strait ecosystem recover a bit, help marine life regenerate.
But as soon as it lifted?
Tension shot right back up. It's almost predictable now. A brief pause, then a surge in activity, and conflict inevitably follows.
And the arrest numbers show it. At least 19 since June 14th, then those 7 more on June 30th north of Mannar. Boats taken too, held New Jaffna.
And Sri Lanka's fisheries minister, Ramalingam Chandrasekhar, made it very clear on July 2nd. No room for leniency, he said. They're even putting more resources into the Navy specifically for making these arrests.
So they're doubling down on enforcement.
Seems that way. The message is unambiguous.
And looking bigger picture, this isn't new. Since 2015, what are the numbers?
It's quite staggering. Over 4,000 Indian fishermen arrested and around 1,000 boats seized in that period.
Wow.
But beyond the numbers, there's real tragedy. You remember those 5 Indian fishermen who died in 2021, allegedly attacked by the Sri Lankan Navy?
Yes, I do. Horrific.
And then 2 Jaffna fishermen killed in clashes at sea. These aren't just statistics. Each incident fuels more anger, more mistrust. Families are destroyed.
Absolutely. And think about the ripple effect. Fishing isn't just the boats at sea. In Tamil Nadu, it supports over 1.2 million people.
Huge numbers.
And in northern Sri Lanka, it's absolutely critical for their post-war economic recovery. So when things flare up, it's not just the fishermen directly involved. It's the processing plants, the export businesses. Everything grinds to a halt. People lose jobs across the board.
You hear that despair directly from them, like Velu from Jaffna, saying simply, they take all the fish and we're left with nothing. It's about survival.
And Ramesh, the fisherman from Ramaswaram, put it so starkly. When arrested, it's not just freedom lost, it's our livelihood. If he can't fish, his family doesn't eat. Every day detained pushes them closer to ruin.
It's a shared tragedy, really. Families on both sides are paying the price for this deadlock.
Which makes the diplomatic failures even more frustrating. You mentioned the talks, but there have been more formal things, too, like the joint working group set up in 2016, meetings in 2011, 2012, all trying to end bottom trawling.
Yes, mechanisms exist on paper. The JWG was meant to be a key channel.
But nothing lasting comes out of it. Why do these efforts keep hitting a wall?
It often feels like, well, a complicated game of political chess. Domestic politics play a huge role.
How so?
In India, particularly Tamil Nadu, the fishing community is a very significant vote bank. So any perceived crackdown or measure that restricts them is politically sensitive. Governments are wary.
Okay. And Sri Lanka's side?
For Sri Lanka, it's about sovereignty, territorial integrity. They see the trawlers as a violation. And there's immense pressure to protect their own fishermen's livelihoods, especially in the recovering north.
So the arrests we're seeing now, like in 2025, are they just managing the immediate crisis?
It often feels like firefighting. Yes, fishermen get arrested, there are diplomatic discussions, maybe they get released after a while. But the root causes the economic pressures, the lack of real alternatives, the environmental damage they don't get fixed. So the cycle just keeps going. There's a deep lack of trust.
And meanwhile, the Palk Bay itself is just suffering. The environmental damage is getting worse.
It's severe. Bottom trawling isn't just taking fish. It's physically destroying habitats. Coral reefs, seagrass beds. These are nurseries, essential for marine life. They're being torn apart.
And environmental groups are sounding the alarm?
Loudly. Warnings about it becoming a marine desert if things don't change drastically. And that's on top of broader issues like climate change and pollution hitting the area too.
Is there data backing this up?
Yeah, that 2025 report from Down to Earth was pretty sobering. It found 65%, nearly two-thirds of the commercial fish species in Tamil Nadu's waters were already overfished.
65%. Wow.
It's not a future problem. It's happening now. The ecosystem just can't regenerate fast enough against this kind of pressure, especially from destructive methods.
And that overfishing probably pushes Indian fishermen further out, right? Into Sri Lankan waters.
Exactly. It creates this terrible feedback loop. Fewer fish at home leads to more border crossings, which leads to more conflict, which puts even more pressure on the already stressed ecosystem.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty bleak picture. Is there any hope here? Are there potential solutions on the table? People talk about joint management, maybe quotas, switching to sustainable methods like line fishing.
Joint management is often floated, yes. Shared quotas, sustainable gear like line fishing or gill netting. It sounds good in theory.
But the reality?
Huge hurdles. First, the cost of switching gear is massive for individual fishermen. Then there's the training. It's a completely different way of fishing. But maybe the biggest hurdle is trust. How do you create and enforce shared rules when there's so much history of conflict and mistrust between the communities and even between the governments?
Right. It requires a massive shift in mindset, not just equipment.
And cultural changes, too. Fishing practices are deeply ingrained traditions.
What about those other ideas? I remember hearing about a plan back in 2011 to buy back trawlers. And Tamil Nadu offered incentives for fishermen to switch to deep-sea fishing.
Yes, those were proposed. The buyback idea didn't really take off. And the deep-sea conversion incentive Tamil Nadu offered, I think, 50%.
Yeah, half the cost. Seems generous, but apparently not many takers. Why wouldn't fishermen jump at that, given the risks of trawling near the border?
Well, a few reasons. First, even with 50% off, a deep-sea vessel is still incredibly expensive for a small-scale fisherman. Huge capital outlay.
Okay.
Second, deep-sea fishing is a whole different ballgame. Different skills, different knowledge of fishing grounds, navigation. The training required is immense, and the infrastructure for that kind of mass retraining isn't really there.
And maybe more risk? Longer trips?
Definitely more risk, longer trips away from home, more dangerous conditions further out, and the income, while potentially higher, might be less predictable than trawling, even in depleted waters. Plus, there hasn't always been consistent political will to really push and enforce a full transition, which would inevitably face pushback.
So these programs need more than just money. They need a whole support system.
Exactly. A comprehensive plan addressing cost, training, safety, market access, and the socioeconomic transition.
What about fish farming, aquaculture? Could that offer an alternative?
Aquaculture definitely has potential. It could provide a more stable, sustainable income. But again, it needs significant upfront investment, ponds, feed, technical know-how.
Requires support.
Absolutely. Government help, maybe microfinance, training, help connecting to markets. And it's a big shift for someone used to going out to sea. It could help diversify incomes and ease pressure on the Palk Bay. But it's not a magic bullet. It needs real long-term commitment.
So ultimately, it feels like real cooperation is the only way forward. Could something like the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, play a role, maybe treating the Palk Bay as a shared resource under international law?
That's certainly a possibility, a crucial one perhaps. UNCLOS provides the legal framework for maritime boundaries and managing shared stocks. It could offer a basis for neutral arbitration or ideally a binding joint management agreement.
Where both countries actively manage it together.
Yes, focusing on long-term sustainability for the whole Palk Bay ecosystem. But, and it's a big but, that requires a fundamental shift in political will from both India and Sri Lanka. They'd need to prioritize the long-term health of the bay and the livelihoods it supports over short-term political calculations or rigid positions on sovereignty.
And without that shift,
the outlook remains grim. Continued economic hardship, ongoing diplomatic strain between India and Sri Lanka, and tragically the fishermen themselves, often the most vulnerable, remain caught in this dangerous crossfire.
So wrapping this up, it's clear the Palk Bay conflict as it stands right now in July 2025 is just deeply complex, intensely personal for those involved, and still very much unresolved. We've touched on competing livelihoods, the serious environmental crisis, the diplomatic stalemate. It all intertwines to create this incredibly difficult situation affecting thousands of lives.
It really does. And perhaps the question to leave people with is this. When we look at the intense pressure on shared resources globally, what wider lessons does the Palk Bay conflict offer us?
That's a good question.
It's this potent mix, isn't it? Unresolved history, environmental decline, economic desperation, trapping communities. What does it teach us about the need to balance immediate needs with ecological limits and finding the genuine political will, not just between nations, but within communities, to find sustainable, empathetic solutions?